Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. So I went through a period over the last few years where I really didn't pick up a 35mm camera much at all, instead working mostly with medium and large format. But recently, over maybe the last 6 months, I've started to shoot quite a bit more 35, just in like a more casual, fun way, as a bit of a departure and break at times from my typical way of working. And this has brought me back to using one of my favorite film cameras, and probably my favorite 35mm SLR, which is the Contax RTS II. So I wanted to make this video today to talk a bit about the system, the history of it, what I love about it so much. You know, these SLRs from Contax very much live in the shadow of the hyped up T point and shoots. And I think that they are great cameras, but there are some things to keep in mind if you're interested in buying one. So in 1975, Contax partnered with Yashica to release a new line of SLR cameras, with the RTS being the very first one they made. But a big selling point or draw with this new SLR system was that Contax also released a fairly large range of Zeiss lenses specifically for it, and these were premium optics for the day, still some of my favorites, and at the time these would have competed against Leica with their R lenses. And Contax ended up releasing a number of different SLR models, but the RTS was always the flagship. And nowadays, you know, you can still find these bodies, I think, for a reasonable price, depending where you look. But you do have to consider that these are all electronic, and depending on where you read or who you talk to, they don't always have the greatest reputation for reliability. So after getting back into film in 2017, the first 35mm SLR I bought was a Contax RTS, the original version, just because I was a big fan of the Contax lenses. And I ended up using that along with a Yashica FX3 Super 2000 to make most of the work in my book, An American Mile. And I absolutely loved that camera, but when I wrapped that project, I wasn't shooting much 35mm anymore, and unfortunately, inside the viewfinder one day, just randomly, the shutter speed indicator on the side fell off and just kind of blocked the view, stuck in the middle. So I actually didn't end up replacing that camera until I moved to England, and I ended up buying the RTS II. So even though they look the same, the RTS II is a very different camera from the original model. Some people even consider it like a brand new camera rather than just an upgrade. The RTS II was released in 1982, and some of the standout improvements were a new titanium shutter, replacing the old cloth shutter. The viewfinder coverage also jumped up to 97% from 92%. And a new LED data display was added in the viewfinder. And also Contax incorporated their quartz crystal timing. And to me, this is a beautiful looking camera, very simple design, and it's got like an incredibly solid feel to it. This is not a light camera at all. It's got some weight to it. In comparison, I have another Contax SLR. This is a 139Q. There's a lot I love about this camera, specifically the size of it and also how big the viewfinder is. But when you kind of pick up both of them side by side, this does feel like a lot lighter, and I don't want to say cheaper, but just not as nice in the hand. But yeah, the RTS feels great, and it also just operates nice as well. You know, the winder feels great, the shutter sounds very nice, the viewfinder itself is massive and bright, and then it has some kind of nice features throughout without being overly complicated. The shutter on this camera goes up to 1/2000th of a second, and then it also has aperture priority mode, which is how I shoot, I would say, like 90% of the time with this. But it is interesting, and it takes some getting used to when it comes to meter operation. So you have this button on the front of the camera right here. You actually have to push that to activate the meter, and when you do that, it'll stay on for about 15 seconds. So this does take a little bit of getting used to, because you have to remember to hit that every time you want to meter and have your shutter speed displayed, or your kind of meter reading displayed. So next up, going to talk about one of the biggest selling features for me with the Contax SLRs, and that is the incredible Zeiss lens lineup. But first, just have to take a quick break, talk about the sponsor today, which is Squarespace. So as a photographer, Squarespace has been such a helpful tool over the years. It gives me a way to make a nice professional looking website and keep it up to date very easily. For example, they have things like their blueprint builder, which lets you build your site from scratch, but also gives you helpful tools like different layout options or font pairings and color palettes. But then also just things like adding a gallery or updating one. You can click and drag to rearrange and reorder images to play with sequencing, easily change image sizes, add thumbnails, and then even do things like add an online store if you want to sell books, prints, and other things like that. So check out squarespace.com today, sign up for a free trial, test it out. When you're ready to launch, you can use my link below to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. So when it comes to the lenses, as mentioned, I absolutely love the Contax Zeiss lens lineup, and they're considered some of the best 35mm optics ever made. And for me, it was a big draw into this system, and I actually owned a number of the lenses and used them for filmmaking before I ever started shooting photos with them. I think this is one of those lineups where you really can't go wrong. All of the lenses that I've owned or have used have performed very well, nice and sharp with great color and contrast. Nowadays, I've slimmed down my lens kit quite a bit just to some of the more affordable, slower options, which optically are still amazing. So I have the 35mm Discon f2.8. This lens lives on the camera, I'd say probably 90% of the time. Also recently picked up the 28mm Discon f2.8, a little bit wider, and performs just as good as the 35. And then I do have a 50mm planar, but I went for the more budget-friendly f1.7 version, which was actually released after the 1.4, and I think it performs just as good, possibly even better wide open. And then I still own the 35-70, and I did a video about this on the channel years ago. This is the lens that I used for a lot of the pictures in my book, and it's still an all-time favorite. I think this is one of the best 35mm zooms ever made, and it's probably a lens that I'll never get rid of. So there's a lot that I love about this camera system and the lens lineup, but there are like a few little minor things or downsides to it. The first is the shutter, and this isn't a huge deal. You do get used to it, but on the RTS, it has the most sensitive shutter release ever, and I can't even count the number of times that I've shot off like a blank frame or a random frame just walking around where it feels like my finger grazed this. So it is very sensitive. You do get used to it, but yeah, I've never used anything else like it before. The second thing and the most important is just when it comes to reliability. So the Contax and Yashica SLRs don't have the best reputation for reliability, but it is tough to know how kind of extreme or how accurate that is, just because we are dealing with very old electronic film cameras and they're probably all bound to have issues at some point. And I think at times all it takes is one person to have a bad experience and they can form a pretty strong opinion about a specific camera or a brand. There are systems out there that I think deserve the reputation, something like the fixed lens 645 Fujis. I've had multiple bad experiences and you hear over and over the same things from people. But with the Contaxes and Yashicas, I wonder how different they are than any other old film camera. And recently, I did a trip to Finland to visit my friends at a camera store, and I brought along the RTS II, and when I told them about it, they kind of joked a little bit about its reliability. They're a store that's buying and fixing a ton of gear, so maybe they've seen a lot of things that I haven't. But I did get this checked out when I brought it there. The meter was off by a stop and the fastest shutter speed was off a little bit, but other than that, it checked out pretty good. And with all the Contaxes that I've owned, I've never had any like catastrophic failure. So it is something to keep in mind because there is a rep out there and maybe there is something to it. But from my personal experience, these cameras have held up pretty well. So I think it just comes down to like how much risk you're willing to accept. But I think the reality is with any of these old film cameras, especially the electronic ones, there is a chance, regardless of the brand or the make, that they might break at some point. For me, with the Contax SLRs, they're still affordable enough that if something did happen to this one, I could go and buy another. It's not like investing in a Contax T point and shoot where I'd spend like £1,500 to £2,000, and if it breaks, I'm gonna be out a ton of money. But beyond the RTS II, there's lots of other options from both Contax and Yashica, which you can still use the beautiful Zeiss lenses with. Personally, I love the 139Q as well. Like I said, it doesn't feel as good as the RTS II, but it's a great camera that's nice and compact and has an amazing viewfinder. The FX3 Super 2000 that I used in the past was also a great camera. Felt a lot more cheap compared to the Contax bodies, but it got the job done, and I also loved its little side grip. There's also a number of newer models. You could go for something like the Contax RT or the RX that have a lot more kind of features and automatic functions. And then even something like the Contax S2, which is fully manual, although very expensive as well. Regardless though, lots to choose from both Contax and Yashica if you just want to test out some of these Zeiss lenses. But for me, I just keep coming back to the RTS II. Like I said, this is my favorite 35mm SLR, and it's not the absolute best camera out there. There's so many different manufacturers and different models that all perform very well. And I think, and I'm sure a lot of you would agree, it just really comes down to kind of finding the camera and the lens system that fits you best, and that provides the results you need, and that gets you excited to go out and shoot. And that's what this does for me. So yeah, that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed this look at the Contax RTS II. I would love to hear if you've had experience with any of the other models, the RX, the RT, the S2, any of those. And other than that, just want to say thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.